This is May 11, 2015, the Committee of the Whole Finance Budget First Draft, which is going to be presented by Becky Aller tonight. Today, this is 7 p.m., so why don't we start off with Vicki taking the roll.
Tom Sotos.
Here.
Dathan Paterno.
Here.
Scott Zimmerman.
Here.
Tony Borelli.
Here.
Vicki Lee is here. Bob Johnson.
Here.
Mark Egeman.
Here.
At the conclusion of the Committee of the Whole Finance Budget Draft, the Board may elect to go into a closed session pursuant to 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C1 to discuss specific employees' salary and benefits, and then we'll take that motion at the end of the meeting. The next full meeting of the board will be held on May 18th, and it will be held at Emerson School. We intend on having a closed session followed by a full regular meeting. At that time, we'll be discussing student awards, ELF grants, recognition of tenured teachers, among many other items. That promises to be a really packed meeting that night. Tonight, of course, we'll be discussing the tentative budget for 2015-16. As we'll find out, there'll be at least 2 further presentations of this and myriad numbers of days of discussion on this. Unfortunately and sadly, after 7 years with us and over 30 years working in education, I left it at 30.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay.
Ish.
Becky will be doing budgets only in her mind as she is sailing off into the sunset. I know we all will miss her and wish her a happy and fruitful experience in your next career. So,
I still have 3 board meetings after this one, so,
yeah.
Unless you add more. So.
Well, this is our 5th Monday in a row.
Yeah, I know.
Next Monday is our 6th Monday in a row. I can't wait. We may make it all the way up to the end of June, right? That being the case, before we get started with the Committee of the Whole, just to throw it out there, as we start with all open meetings, we take some public comments. And if there are any individuals in the audience who'd like to make a comment, they can. Let me just put it out onto the public record. It's always been practice for the Board of Education District 64 to ask for folks who come to podiums and to mention their name and address. I just finished doing my required Opens Meetings Act testing on the internet and came across a little factoid. And that little factoid was that folks cannot be forced to give their address, only their names when they come up to the podium. So they can be encouraged to do so, and it's recommended they do so. So at least you know who's living in the district, who's not living in the district. But it's not a requirement. So I want to put that out there. I know that's videotaped, so people hopefully will see this at some point and recognize that fact. So going forward, we'll ask that they give their name and address, but if they don't want to give their address, they're not required to. So just to cross those T's and dot those I's, now we come out to Becky. So if you'd like to start, Beck, please.
It is rather melancholy for me tonight because it will be 37 years of my doing budget presentations. And if all goes well tonight, this will be my last one prior to retirement. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on why we even do this, and it's all governed by the school code. There's not much in a business office that gives us any flexibility or discretion. Most of what we do is defined by the school code and/or board policy. So a budget is established under the provisions of the Illinois School Code and is designed to meet the budgetary requirements. We must adopt our budget by the end of the first fiscal year, which might sound a little bit strange. So we have to adopt it by September 30th because our fiscal year runs July 1 through June 30th. We are obligated to have our budget on display once it's adopted on its tentative basis for 30 days prior to a public hearing. That notice of public hearing must be advertised in a publication of general circulation, and we must notify the community of the date, time, and location of that public hearing so that if they want to make comment on the budget, they have the right to do that. The legal budget satisfies the minimum level of financial and program information for state, local, and federal governments, and it also provides you as a Board of Education the authority to expend funds and tax property. A budget should be clear, reliable, understandable, And once adopted, it should be the budget is a plan to accomplish the district's educational goals as well as their financial goals. One of the things that maybe the two new board members don't understand is that one of those requirements that comes out of the school code is that we are required to maintain our books on fund accounting. So you will hear me refer to the education fund or the operation and maintenance fund or the debt service fund, transportation fund. Each one of those funds has a separate levy, and we must maintain the integrity of those funds. I always say that when I started in the olden days, that some of the school attorneys who thought that we should have a separate bank account for the education fund, separate bank account for the operation and maintenance fund, so that you didn't commingle your funds. We've come a long way, and we have a single bank account that we run our operation through, which makes it easy, but we must maintain the integrity of those individual funds. What we don't know at this time on the revenue side is that those taxes and that levy that you approved in December and we filed with the county clerk was the request for the 2014 tax extension. The county has not completed their business yet, and we expect sometime in the month of June notification from the county clerk's office that they have extended our taxes and what we expect to get from our levy. So our budget is based upon some assumptions, based upon a number that we don't know what it is yet. So the biggest change that will come in the next draft of the budget will be the tax revenue. And so today a couple of questions came through as to why is the budget for tax receipts so high, and the answer is, number one, I didn't know how much the first collections would be. Right now I think we're tracking that we're receiving a higher percentage than I have projected. So once that 2014 levy extension is received by the county clerk, we'll be able to accurately, as close as possible anyway, calculate what the second installment will be, and then make some predictions as to what the 2015 levy will be, which you're not even going to do until December of this year and collect a year from now.
Becky, first of all, as we go through this, since we don't have a whole lot of people in the audience,
Thank you.
and because we have two new board members going through this for the first time, I'm wondering if it's okay if you entertain questions as
Absolutely.
we go through this.
Absolutely.
And then the second thing, I'm wondering if this is a good moment in time, since we're talking about taxes, to spend just another minute or two or three talking about that whole process, about EVAs and limiting rates and how I know, but we don't have to, we don't have to beat it to death. But I would like, for at least two of our members' benefit, to give them a little background on how that's all pulled together.
If you read the narrative that was in the budget book that I presented you, it talks about the tax cap legislation, and that goes back to the early 1990s, which limited the entitlement, the dollars that a district could receive. And it takes the formula, it's pretty simple. It takes the prior year's extension, multiplies that by the CPI that from December of the previous year. So when we asked for the 2014 tax extension, it's going to be based upon 1.5%, and that CPI was for December of 2013. We collect a tax extension in 2 installments. You all, I hope, have all paid your property taxes. The first installment that was due March 1st. That, according to state statute, is supposed to be 55% of the prior year's tax bill. But you don't collect all your taxes because not everybody has the wherewithal or the inclination to pay their taxes on time. So if it were pure, we would get 55% of last year's extension. The second extension comes when Cook County finishes their tax bills, and we start collecting them. And they're usually due September 1st, and so that you start paying in August for September collections. And then we tend to collect those monies for the next several years, to be honest with you. It slowly trickles in. A large, very large percentage of it will come in September, October, and then it trickles in with refunds and what other calculations the county clerk is doing at that time. We collect in one fiscal year 2 tax levies. So in this year's budget, we have both the 2014 tax extension, a portion of it, and a portion of the 2015 tax extension. But it's all based upon that CPI that is issued a year prior to you even asking for dollars.
The benefit of having a positive fund balance of 4 months comes into play if one of those payments is a month or 2 or more delayed. That fund balance, therefore, allows us, basically from a checkbook, allows us to pay our bills until the money from Cook County comes in.
Correct.
I remember as a library trustee, there were several instances where the money did not come into the library for 3 or 4 months, and they literally were on the last dregs of whatever they had in the savings account. And at that time, they did have several months cashed away. And they burned through it pretty well until those monies did come in. So I know it happens. Historically, it doesn't on a repetitive basis, but it does happen. And if it does happen, it can be quite injurious because, from your descriptions before, we can go out and borrow that money at a cost and pay those bills until the money from the county comes in.
Tax warrants are very expensive to borrow against, right?
And it costs us a ton of money to do
Correct.
that.
We have a working cash fund that provides us adequate funds to pay our resources as revenues trickle in. We're highly, as you will see in a minute, highly dependent on tax receipts, state revenues, federal revenues. And I think you've probably all read about the financial crisis going on in the state of Illinois. And they're prorating funds that were due and payable to us this year that I'll talk about when we get to the state revenues. So that it's the other 2 categories that I don't know yet, state revenues for the budget next year and federal revenues. And I don't think that the state revenues will be clear until they figure out how to solve the pension crisis, which was found unconstitutional last Friday. According to EdRed, which is our lobbying group that we all belong to, most districts in this area belong to, although pension shift, which we were talking about several years ago, has not been on the table, it's likely that it will resurface and have some conversations. So I always say in legislation, stay tuned. I don't panic, I don't get excited until the bills are actually passed out of the legislature and on the governor's desk. And by then you really know whether the governor's going to veto them or whether they're going to stand the test of time.
Okay, can I ask, just because we had a few people here when you were doing the levy earlier this year, so it might be worthwhile for our new board members just to talk about the levy process and why we levy, and then how we tend to get a lower rate than we actually levy, and that's intentional in terms of asking for more because we wind up getting less. Can you just spend a few minutes on that?
The state law says that tax cap formula says that we are entitled to the lesser of 5% or that CPI number. As you probably saw in the narrative and in the budget book, the CPI hasn't reached anywhere near 5%, frankly, back to the 1990s, if we went back that far. And I've heard stories that have been told out of Springfield that when they picked that 5% number, nobody thought that it would ever be lower than 5%. I think it was a rude awakening initially that the CPI started coming in much lower than that because it affects every governmental entity that's subject to it.
I think in 07, 08 was that 0.08%.
0.1.
And the year before that, I think it was 4 point something.
4.1, and then it went down to 0.1. And frankly, we were all running around scratching our heads trying to decide how we were going to live with that. And we all found a way to do it. So on the expenditure side, except for those 2 bargaining groups where I have a salary schedule, the board hasn't approved salaries yet. So there's a 3% factor included in the budget for most salaries. But once the board approves salaries, those numbers will be either adjusted up or down or sideways or remain at that level. But until I know the actual salaries for every individual, the budget has a placeholder for that. We have grants that are tied to state revenues and federal revenues. I don't know what those allocations are for this year, and I don't know the distribution of those funds yet, so I don't know that. There's a meeting next week that will give us the renewals for our workers' compensation and property and liability insurance, and that's the Tort Immunity Fund, Fund 80, and again, separate levy to fund those particular layers of insurance that the district is required to carry. Now, I do have an update on the bottom of the slide on the screen, although it's not in your binders. The binders were prepared and ready to distribute at the last board meeting. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to change it because I was gone for the next 4 days at a conference. But those decisions that were made at the April 27th board meeting are not factored in this. So there will still be a reduction of $403,450 for that technology equipment when you reduced it from the $1,078,000 that was requested down to $675,000. And then we also changed that night from leasing the vehicle purchase to an outright purchase. So those two adjustments I know have to be made yet. So those are not factored into
Was
those.
the financing option in the budget?
Yes.
You changed it to the outright?
Yes, you did.
Okay, got it.
Yes, you did.
So that one summary sheet that you have up there, at our next meeting, will we have a finalized, updated sheet to reflect those changes?
Next Monday?
Yeah.
Tomorrow is residency day, so I doubt I will have it ready for next Monday, but I certainly can give it to you in a Friday memo or bring it to the June, is it 11th board meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Fair enough.
okay,
Just so that we'll have it in preparation for
We can do it
continued
in a memo.
discussion.
all right,
Yeah.
okay. The referendum commitment is one of those cherished conversations that we hold in this district because we always refer back to it. And during that referendum campaign, and it was prior to my being here, the district made a commitment that said we would not return to the voters for at least 10 years. I think because of the financial condition of the district, the board in August of 2013 felt comfortable extending that to 2020-21. I would tell you what's going on in the state right now, and depending on what happens with state revenues, you may want to revise that number, the 2021 year. But again, I think that's a goal, and sometimes goals need to be modified based upon new facts.
Yeah, Becky, when I read this, that might be the one thing I say with the semantics of this, is it was a commitment in '07, and I think everyone on the board I've ever served with is very committed to that 10-year, right?
Mm-hmm.
The goal, this was a goal, and so
Right.
to say it's an extension of a commitment, I think we're all working as hard for it, but you're right. We understood that there could be realities that would be thrown our way,
Right.
and any big decision we made would alter that, right?
Mhm.
But so I was just afraid to call it another commitment
Commitment.
necessarily. Maybe just say it's been the goal of the last board, and this board may choose to keep it, may choose to extend it, shorten it, whatever it wants to do.
Right.
But yeah, I would say I maybe characterize it more. of a goal.
There's not enough information right now to make that change.
Right.
But there may be in the next month or so. Also, as Dr. Burley continues to remind us as we talk about facilities, that the 2007 referendum did not include nor consider capital improvements, and nor did the strategic planning process that took place in 2009 consider either finances or facilities. Operating fund revenues, and this is the big picture, are expected to increase by 3.5%. And then there's my caveat about the property taxes, that although the numbers right now indicate a 3.8% increase, that's likely to change when we get the information from the county clerk.
I was going to interject there before we started this on that last slide. The referendum never took into account any capital facility improvement. However, we have taken $11 million out of our capital account to pay for improvements with cash, and we did the balance of those improvements with bonding.
Yes.
And with that, we still are pushing for the 2021 referendum. So I consider the last board's economic goals and achievements to be stellar.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
Other local revenue increases, our extended day care program, we increased the number of students that we took, so obviously there's an increase in the fees that we should collect. And the TIF payment that we received this year was greater than we had received the prior year. And then the reduction of interfund transfers, and I think it was Mr. Johnson that asked that question today. When in my conversations with Elizabeth Hennessy from William Blair, she is slightly concerned with the 0.8 CPI that we won't have enough resources to actually make debt extension payments, and so the reduction is not transferring interest income out of the debt service fund into the education fund. It's about $40,000. But she thought for several years we may want to suspend doing that, and then you can start it again in a couple years if the CPI bounces back.
So
Becky,
go ahead.
I just, the Beyond the Bell program, is that a break-even program, or is there some revenue opportunity there?
That's a Park District program. We have nothing to do with
Nothing
that.
to do with it?
No.
Okay.
Other than we give them our facilities to operate.
We have some trade agreements with them, use of fields mowing.
But we had those in place prior to Beyond the Bell.
So Becky, could you, so when we talk about an anticipated property tax increase of 3.8%, so we mentioned that there's a limiting factor of 1.5% for this year. So how do we, I guess just for education purposes, how then do we get from where we're supposedly capped at 1.5%, that we end up with a property tax increase of 3.8%?
I think I projected that we would get more taxes in the second collection. And again, this will all be revised and modified when the information comes from the county clerk. Right now, the tax line items for next year's budget are based upon numbers I don't even know what they are yet. And it's an unfortunate circumstance that almost every school district, city, municipality finds himself in when they do their budget presentations this early in the process.
So could I ask you to sort of stretch that out a little for me? So we know last year the tax increase was less than 3%, and this year it's less than 3%. So even if there's some timing differences or something, I mean, is some of this, and you could tell me, is some of this due to, I know that, I believe, and you can correct me, that if there's new construction, that there isn't a limiting factor put on the taxes associated with that. But I guess I'm just trying to understand how we're projecting that and I'm looking to be educated, how our tax revenue can go up by percentages greater than what our limiting factors are.
Currently, it's the distribution of funds between the fiscal years. So the distribution of the tax levies between the fiscal years. And I assumed that we would collect more in the second installment because of new property. We have Whole Foods. There's an increase in homes that have gone up in the last several years. So I'm assuming there's going to be more new construction, but we don't know what that number is yet.
Okay,
And
so
those collections would come in the second installment.
So a component of it could be that the EAV of properties in our district has risen, and that we are assessing that 1.5% increase against a higher EAV.
Well, the limiting rate is calculated by taking the prior year extension, multiplying it by that CPI factor, and dividing it by the
Total EVA.
total
minus the
EAV
corporate.
less the new construction, and then you get a limiting rate, and then you take that limiting rate and multiply it by
Total EVA.
exactly, or the new construction, and adding the two numbers together.
Yeah, I guess, so is there some math behind this 3.8%?
Yes, there is. There's a huge spreadsheet that
Demonstrate?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could share that with me, I would appreciate it.
I will be glad to do that.
Okay, thanks.
And Bob, I appreciate that question because I had the exact same question earlier today. And Becky, listening to you, I can certainly appreciate increasing EVA. You still have 1.5% of a bigger piece of pie. That's going to alter your revenue ratios. I get all that. And you're projecting and you're really kind of grasping things. But, if we're going to be at 1.5 and the new construction may come in at 1%, which is a pretty reasonable guesstimate, that still puts us at 2.5. That's still a far cry from 3.8, and I say this because I'm concerned that people will see that in reviewing the budget, they'll see 3.8 and say, what's all that?
And that 3.8 has nothing to do with an individual taxpayer's bill. The other variable that will affect not only this year's budget, the 15-16 budget, but the 16-17 budget, and I think you heard Howie Krause and I talk about this in February when we presented the financial projections. Next spring, when the first installment of the 2015 taxes come in, it's 55% of this year's levy, not the 0.8. So we're going to collect more funds in March than we're entitled to, which means that the second installment going forward for the 16-17 budget, that is going to be much lower than you would typically receive. So that we talked in February about receiving a higher level of taxes in the 15-16 budget year,
Right.
and having a lower level of taxes in the 16-17 year. So it affects 2 budget years.
I'm still a little murky on the percentage though, but like I said, like Bob asked, if we could see the numbers, I think it would probably help make it a little bit clearer, because I think we all understand that we're pretty much fixed by that 1.5% CPI. And then you add the new construction component to that, which is secondarily and ancillary to that 1.5%.
Right.
It's just that when folks see that, I'd be very interested to see that calculation myself.
And Bob, I'm probably not going to give you that calculation in that spreadsheet until we actually know what the Cook County extension is, because then it will make more sense once we have actual numbers than my predicting what numbers may be.
I mean, I'd be glad to look at it otherwise. I guess, yeah, my interest is just understanding, as we're projecting this out. I guess one, making sure maybe that we're not, being too rosy in terms of our revenue expectations. And also, just as sort of Tony alluded, if we are sort of trumpeting that we can only raise taxes by the CPI of 1.5%, but yet there's a public document that says that the taxes are going to go up by 3.8%. Just sort of how is that occurring? What is, just to understand, what is the district controlling, and maybe what are other forces that are potentially causing it, whether they're timing differences or something of that nature.
Right. I will hope to make that clearer for you.
Thank you.
Operating expenditures are expected to go up 2.4%, or about $1.9 million. Salary increases are about 3.4%. Benefit increase of 1.7%, and there's in the written binder, and there's a detail of how it's only 1.7 when the PPOs are going up 3.5 and the HMO is going up 4.1. Purchase services, supplies, and capital outlay. Purchase services and supplies are going up. Purchase services are going up, supplies are going down. Capital outlay is decreasing because of the capital projects fund. And the fact that the project that we're doing at Field in the summer of 2015 is much less costly than the project that we did last summer. And the other expense area is decreasing by about 4%, and the other expense areas where we pay our special needs tuitions out of, and that's basically what's driving that.
So would you say it's fair, sort of looking at this, just given that the capital budget's really sort of a driver of the decrease here, that
Yes, it is.
just as we look at this, it's not necessarily that our ongoing expenses are decreasing by 2.4%, because it looks to me if you take that capital outlay out and think about this as sort of our core budget, our expenses are actually going up by about 2.3%.
And I think you'll see in some of the budget documents, the colored sheets that are in the tabs 1 and 2, you can see where I subtotal it and then add it back in. So.
Beck, I have just a couple of questions on that slide. First of all, can you describe what purchase services are so that I can understand what their increase would be?
Purchase services range from professional development, contractors that we hire to I'd say vendors, not contractors, that we bring in to provide professional development, to do in-service, legal fees, our contract for food service, our contract for transportation. So any type of contractual service that we enter into.
So it spans multiple funds?
Absolutely.
And it's put under a separate basket called purchase services?
Correct.
Okay. I noticed that the supply is also decreasing. Can you attribute a decrease in supplies, or at least a portion of those supplies, to the increase in technology that we're using? So there's less paper, there's less things like that. I mean, is there, I mean, if we're ordering copy paper and all that, just board packets alone
I know.
is saving reams, trees and trees.
And at next Monday's board meeting, you're going to see a request to award our copy paper bid for next year. We're not spending any less money on paper, and we're not using any less paper. Although I would hope over time that you get there. It's just not happening right now.
Well, that leads me to my final question. About a year ago, as we embarked on this technology increase, I asked for about this time of year to look at our energy usage over the course of a year to see if a district-wide distribution of laptops and all the extra charging needs that they would require, just as a knowledge, just to have a knowledge base of really what kind of electrical draw this portends to be. I mean, have you been able to do any look back to see where our 14 year-end electrical budget was versus where we're at now?
What I've looked at is the money, but certainly we can go back and look at the usage. I think Scott can go back to Constellation Energy and draw those types of reports saying from
Kilowatt
September
hours. Yeah.
through
June.
March, and compared to different years at the same time period. So I think we can do that and bring that back to you.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting, I don't think it's going to be a huge amount of money, but be an interesting side note to show what the full effect of the implementation of one-to-one would be.
And it's not just going to be the dollars, but I'd like to look at the actual usage of the energy and see where we're at. Theoretically, we should see an increase, but you have to remember that we added air conditioning at Field.
Mhm.
We finally solved some of our problems at Carpenter.
Mhm.
So that there's going to be multiple things that cause electricity anyway to go up.
But you should be able to back out those specifics.
We'd have to have that conversation with Constellation. I'm not sure if I can do that.
Okay.
Our statement of position, and frankly, I think this slide tells it all, which is why you see a smile on my face. So the subtotal of the operating funds, the first box, shows that we currently, and this is prior to adjusting revenues, that we're showing a $1.4 million surplus, or we're going to maintain our fund balance at about 70%. That is helping us achieve those goals or that we have set. When you add capital projects in, because we're draining down then on operating fund balances, that just brings us slightly less than about 69%. So we lose about 1% when we factor in the capital projects. And debt service is always excluded when we talk about operating funds. So I think this district continues to have a positive financial forecast. And as I have continued to say for 6 years, if you manage your expenses and you maximize your revenues, then you will continue down this road. So, but again, once the big variable in all of that revenue column is the tax revenues.
And Becky, the debt service, if I'm using the right term, is that a category that when we sort of assess for taxes, that we do that sort of independently of any limiting factor? So
Correct.
So we're allowed to go and capture the full amount that we believe we need for that.
Correct. It's referendum debt, and/or it's debt issued under the debt extension base, as we did a year ago when we issued the bonds for $8.6 million to do the field projects and other capital improvement projects.
And so when we were talking about our tax revenues being at 3.8% higher potentially or whatever, that number is a component of that 3.8%,
Correct.
right? Okay, thank you.
And Becky, just to just pick up on that comment by Bob, just so that folks understand, the Emerson bonds truly will not expire until
2017.
17, right. And then we will have 5 years beyond that for the field bonds. So all bonding won't expire until 22.
21, I believe it is. I believe it's 21, but I'd have to go
5
back
and
and look.
17, yeah. So that's just so that they're stratified, so that
Correct.
folks know. And as the years go on, and as we go through that process, as we whittle away at that bond debt that we owe, if we need to for capital improvements, if we need to go back, there's an ever increasing amount that we'll be able to pull out initially, because we still have arguably 7 or 8 years left of bond payments. It's a smaller amount, and if we can hold off any capital improvements for 2, maybe 3 years, there'll be a bigger pool
Correct.
to pull another bond out of.
When we looked at it in February or March of this year to see what availability we had under debt extension base, if you waited until the current debt is all expired, that's not a good word, but then you'd have capacity of about 25 million. Depending on how short your repayment schedule is, you wouldn't have access to 25 million. You would, if you wanted to pay that out over 20 years, that would probably be the maximum that you could get.
Yeah. And when I look at this, I see capital projects.
And that changes as your EAV changes.
Yes. And when I look at the capital projects under June 2016, I notice that there's 920,000. Does that imply that there's 920,000 left of the field bond?
To be spent next summer of
spent.
2016. And we plan, that's what we've talked about since we sold the bonds.
Right.
That you'd have about $1 million.
And do we have, because some of the things that we are going to be budgeting are going to be drawing down against that.
Correct.
Do we have that full 920 allocated already? Or I know a good chunk of it has been allocated.
The 920, I think, is still subject to board approval and board,
Wasn't the voice over internet protocol?
that's out of this, that's budgeted out of the less expenditures, that $2.4 million. That's,
So that wasn't bond funding? Something was bond funding out of that.
the network upgrade is out of the capital projects fund. The VoIP upgrade, which we financed over 5 years, is out of the operation and maintenance fund.
Okay, all right.
And what about the Washington Wall?
The Washington Wall was budgeted and factored in at 90,000. It was much higher than that, so that's probably another budget adjustment that will have to be made.
Yeah, no, I guess
He
my
means
question
what
was,
fund?
is
Yeah.
it part of the capital project?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Becky, I just want to ask this because we're talking about debt. When I look back at the debt service over the years, in the 13-14 year, we were at 3.8, and then 14-15, we were 3.2, and now we're 3.1. Was it last year when we issued the debt, it didn't really impact last year's numbers, right?
No.
So, but it is still fair to say, going from the 3.2, the 3.22 to the 3.13, that effectively, in rough numbers, is we sort of blended and extended our debt, right?
Correct.
We lowered the amount we're paying. We
Correct.
didn't take all off the table.
Correct.
But yet we still, to the taxpayers, lowered how much we're paying
Correct.
in debt service, and we're able to fund the projects.
Absolutely.
So, in effect, our theory, I just want to make sure that this number, when I have, talk over the fence with someone, this number is effectively mathematical proof that our theory worked. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that that's there, because it was controversial, and people have asked me about it, and I want to make sure that I'm answering them correctly.
That is the fiscal year payments.
Right. Right. And I know
And then
it's
somebody
all
could
that,
talk
but-
about calendar year payments, and it would be a different number, so.
Right, so, okay, I just wanted to make sure that I understood your numbers correctly.
So to put that in English, so that most people can understand that, Scott, if I may, basically, we were able to borrow more money to pay for field and yet lower the bond payment per year. And we did that by appreciating the drop in interest rates.
Correct.
And because of the interest rates being so much lower and refinancing the other bond interest rates, we could take that money out, do the field, and yet still, on a year-to-year basis, pay less money going forward.
Correct. And it's nice to have a partner like Elizabeth Hennessy from William Blair to guide us through that process and know when's the right time to go to the market to maximize those savings.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that I read those numbers right.
Thanks for pointing that out.
So, yeah, so going back to what Tony said about the capital projects, and so if we have the 920,000 there, so that's estimated to be remaining at the end of June of next year.
Right, and it will be spent in the summer of 2016.
Okay.
So the majority of the expenses will be made in July and August of next year.
So that, and just so we're clear, so that's a part of a legal component of the borrowing was
Correct.
that those funds have to be expended by
Correct.
that time.
Correct.
So the next summer's projects are going to be paid for out of this budget.
Know that
Right.
you'll budget next year. If that line remains true, you'll have a beginning balance at July of 2000, or end of June 2016 of 920s, 973. You'll have small interest income as a revenue, and you'll have an expense of 920. And leaving you a zero balance in the
So
capital projects.
we'll take it out as cash, and then we'll allocate it to whatever need we need? Is that
Correct.
the idea? Okay.
And I think that will come out of the facility master plan that will be coming in June. It certainly won't be enough money to do the facility master plan in June, but that you'll review in June, but it'll be a start. As I've said over and over and over again, we're highly reliant on property taxes. 85.5% of our budget is property taxes. So we are, and the next largest source is, excuse me, other income, which is school fees, registration fees, the Jefferson Daycare Program, food service program, but certainly revenues that support what we do for students. The Cook County property tax limitation law, as we talked earlier, is subject to the lesser of 5% of the CPIU. And as it gives you a history from what the issuance of the CPI in 2008, levy year of 2009, where it was 0.1, and the fiscal years that affects. And it goes down, it gives you a slight history of what we're doing, what has happened since 2008. Property tax collections, when all is said and done, we collect anywhere from 98 to 99, slightly over 99%, and that is all contingent upon what's happening at the county for collections and how many tax objections and how many tax objections are approved. Personal property replacement taxes, we saw a slight decline once the state of Illinois thought that was another resource that they could capitalize on for them, and they moved some money from that line into paying for the regional offices of education. But as the economy picks up, we continue to receive slightly more. And I think that by the end of the year, we'll have basically the same amount of money that we collected last year. Other local income is tuition, Jefferson preschool, summer school, student fees or lunch and registration. Those are the biggest components. And under other, City of Park Ridge TIF payment. Other student fees is a very small amount, probably about $60,000, not a small number, but about $60,000. And those are those ancillary fees that they pay for athletics or participation in music. General state aid, I probably could put a great big X through this slide right now, because this is one of the areas that I anticipate Springfield altering. This year, they've prorated the final 4 payments, so that we're going to lose about $60,000 in general state aid from what the budget was, only because of the prorations that happened once Governor Ronner took office. Other state and federal revenues, clearly. If Senate Bill 1, although nobody believes it will happen this year, if anything comes close to that, we will lose the majority of our state funding. Our federal funding is based upon IDEA, which is our special ed funding, Title I, which supports our low-income students. Scratchy. Title II funding is our teacher quality and helps supports teacher in-services. And then we get about $30,000 for special milk, and that's the only federal money that we receive towards our food service program. No surprise when you're an entity like a school district that the majority of your expenditures are salaries and benefits. 68% of our operating fund budget is salary related, 13% goes to employee benefits. Purchase services, as I talked earlier, have the large contracts such as transportation and food service in there, and that alone is probably several $1 million. The operating fund salaries are going up 3.4%, and again, this is all the operating funds, so that includes the capital outlay reduction. So although it sounds really, really good that we're reducing our budget, it's only one line item that's bringing us to that. In the education fund, we're seeing a 2.4% increase. Salaries are 3.4%, employee benefits are 1%. Purchase services are going up 9.3%, supplies and materials down 10.3%. Capital outlay in the ed fund is pretty stable, and the other area is down by 7.5%, and that's because we have some of our special education population who's moving off to high school, and so we will have less students to serve next year at that.
And Becky, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So when we're talking about the life safety study that we're doing, and I guess the expectation from what I've heard is that there will be things that will come out of that. There will be in different categories. You must do, you probably should do, et cetera, and stuff. So do we have in this budget, and I might be going backwards a slide to the operating funds expenditure budget, but do we have anything factored in here that you know, we will all of a sudden say, okay, we've got to do something, we should be doing this in the 2015-16 budget, that we wouldn't say, oh, well, you know, that'll just have to wait a year or something. I guess, have we factored that in here at all?
No, but you have the opportunity to do that when you adopt the budget in its final form in September. So depending on what comes out of the facility, the life safety / facility master plan, there may be some things identified that we really need to do yet this fiscal year, and we will move some of that $970,000, that fund balance I was talking to, into the expense side.
Okay.
And just lowering that number.
Okay, thank you.
Becky, when our kids in the junior high take a sports class, an extracurricular activity, is that paid for by their fees?
If they play basketball,
Correct.
it's $100. If they're wrestling, it's going to be $100. If it's volleyball, I believe it's $75. Yeah. And track and cross country are something less than that, and I'd have to look it up to see
But does that fee pay for the program?
It pays for the materials. It does not pay for the cost of the stipends.
You know, 2 years ago, and Becky's laughing when I say this, but I mean, most members on the board here will remember over 2 years ago, I asked that we do an evaluation of the extracurricular programs to determine their worth. And the study that came out showed that the student fees were covering approximately 50% of the cost of the programs. And at the time, that was considered reasonable. And the reason given was that it was part of the educational milieu. Things were offered through the educational process. We're supposed to have a free education by by state constitution, and it was deemed a reasonable amount to pay. I'm not so sure I agree 100% with that. I think that some things, certainly on a pure voluntary basis, if you want it, you should pay more. It's kind of like a VAT tax thing from Europe, but that's my opinion. But when we did that at one time back, there was two components to that, and we only wound up looking at one component. And I'm wondering if there's a way, I know you're phasing out, we have somebody phasing in. I'd like to see the other half of that study done so the board can, and the public, can understand that there's a cost with these programs and what the cost actually is and what people are paying for it. And I think the board needs to know that, and we need to appreciate these expenses going forward as we look at our long-range projections. So your thoughts on that?
You know, when we did that study several years ago, there wasn't enough time at that particular to extensively review the extracurriculars, the fee-for-service type of extracurricular activities, and it just kept moving back and back and back. If that is something the board wants the administration to pursue.
The reason I bring it up is if things get tough, and if we're talking about extending the referendum, I look at providing an education, with the student fees that we pay, but to me that's extra, playing volleyball, playing basketball, and I am a huge proponent of it. It is something extra. So if you were to play out of your school, you would be paying some kind of club fee
Right.
or association fee. So I do think we need to look at, I'm one board member, that the child that chooses to pay that, maybe would have to pay for that teacher stipend, the equipment, et cetera. If things got to that level, that we'd have to start cutting things.
Last time you did this, do you recall what the study was? I know there was two components. One was extracurricular activities, and then the one that you reported on was what? I can't remember.
Supplies, materials, technology equipment, paper, those type of particular
Yeah, I thought it was more specific than that, but I'd have to go back. But-
core subjects, the
Core-
materials, textbooks.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, that being the case, is there any consensus on the board that over the next 3-4 months, giving plenty of leeway and plenty of time to kind of cobble this together, is there any consensus on the board that you'd like to see a report like this?
Well, I'm sure you as a board saw the updated fee study that Bernadette published about a month ago, updating that fee study that we had done a year ago. So are you talking the extracurriculars or just updating that fee study again?
I'd have to go back and look at
Okay.
that study, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to see it. Just talking about this specific part of the budget, I do think that it's a valuable thing for us to look at, whether the whole city or district should be paying for children to be doing extracurricular activities. I have my own opinions about it, but I think we should look at it and at least present it to the public and make a decision whether we should continue to do that going forward.
If there's one more, we'll have a consensus and we can move forward.
Yeah, I'll be that one more, because I think it would be good to know, not just simply what does it cost in terms of paper or the, wrestling uniform, whatever it is. I think it needs to have the stipends and the salaries and heck, if you can say, whatever those other expenses are. Because at the end of the day, I think the question that the board faces is, what amount of extracurricular activities should a district be paying for? And there'll be varying philosophies. I know there's a lot of students and they really get charged up by that and it really helps them in their progress. And so we need to think about that. And, are the same students who want to go out for band and basketball the same group of students with the same, means? I think we need as a district to decide what we want to support in educating the whole child. So a study, clear information is the most important thing to have to start it.
So Dr. Heinz, I'll leave it up to you to kind of fit in with Becky departing and Luann coming on to somehow.
I started a chart today.
Yes, yes, the number, this will
Number of
go in
things that
there.
need to be done.
I'm sure this will fit in there someplace. And obviously, it's not gonna happen tomorrow, but,
No.
September-ish, I imagine.
Well, exactly, you need to close this fiscal year out, so you're dealing with real data.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks.
So one of the biggest components of the education fund is salaries, and one of the biggest components within the salary category are teacher salaries. And this slide is in honor of Mr. Heidi, who just left the board, because every year he asks these questions. And so it finally dawned on me last year that I should throw in the information so he didn't have to ask the question. So here we go. Base salaries for teachers account for 58.8% of the education fund budget, and that's just teacher salaries. Teachers are, how we calculate teacher salaries is that they're placed at their current lane and step, and then teachers are moved one step and then placed on the 2015-16 salary schedule that was a part of the last bargaining agreement.
And
And
Becky, when you're saying teachers here, you're not including teacher assistants?
No, this is just certified teachers. In 2014-15, we had full-time equivalency, FTE. One of the things the new board members will learn is the alphabet soup that we use. So the full-time equivalency of teachers alone was 395.61, and the board approved some positions in February, and we think that FTE will increase for 15-16 to 402.11. When you look at the final budget adoption in September, you should know what that number is actually, and so therefore that's why the little box up at the top that says will be adjusted in September. And so if you want to know the numbers, and board members have asked for this in the past, the 2013 scattergram, and that's just taking every teacher and placing them in the lane and the step that they're on and making the mathematical computation, was $34,037,741. The cost of step, moving that same staff right down the salary schedule, so from step 1 to 2, or from 10 to 11, or from 19 to 20, that cost is $518,000. Again, those positions that the board approved, with the anticipated increases for class size adjustments, will cost the district about $414,000. We have retirements, as you saw last Thursday evening, and we expect to replace those people, so that we expect to see a savings from those retirements of about $214,000. Part of our new, not part of the new, but a part of the teacher's contract allows people to give us notice up to December 31st of this year to receive a 6% increase in their salary. It's part of the retirement benefits. I'm just carrying a factor of about 75,000. There are a numerous amount of teachers who sit at the top of the schedule, who have been on step 20 for at least 1 year, who get a longevity stipend, and right now that cost is $292,000.
Does that, so does that stipend, does that increase over time, or does somebody get that every year, a certain increase?
They get it every year, and it increases the same amount as the base. So in the last contract, there was a 2% increase in the base salaries. So every cell increased by 2%. And then as they moved their staff movement, we averaged 1.5%. But the longevity stipend goes up. It's calculated based upon MA 48, step 20, a percentage of that. So it's all outlined in the contract.
You know, Becky, you mentioned step averaging 1.5 plus the 2%. Obviously, 2 and 1.5 is 3.5. Mm-hmm. However, I recall a discussion that was utilized where step and lane was 3.5 plus the 2% contracted raise, that would equal 5.5. So I'm wondering, my recollection is slightly different. And I went back here on page 30 of the document, the Words document, and you have PREA salary object code 1200, Increases are budgeted for all returning staff per negotiated agreement, 2% base increase plus step. The overall increase averaged 3.85. So based on this, you're saying that the step is averaging 1.85.
It's got all those other factors in there also, Tony. So it's not just step movement, but the changes in staffing, the increased staffing that you approved, the retirement savings, and so there's a lot of components that get you to that percentage increase in Object Code 1200. It's just not base salary and step movement in that. It's all components of those.
Yeah, it's just, I recall different numbers. I even recall a yearly increase of much more than that.
It depends on the number of retirees that we have in any given year. It depends on the number of new positions we approve in any one year, because that'll affect the bottom line in that category. So that Object Code 1200 teacher salaries is intended to be anything that's base salary related.
So is it safe to say, just so that we can cut to the chase on this,
Sure.
that on average, each individual should appreciate a 3.85% increase?
In theory, but it's not actual. Because when you look at our salary schedule and you look at and forget anybody making lane movement, if everybody were just moving down the salary schedule, there are step increases that equal 6% or greater. There are not a lot of them in that schedule, but there are some step increases, so not everybody gets a 3.5.
Yeah.
The people at the top only get 2%.
Yeah, but that's why I said on average. I mean, just kind of blend it out, make it homogeneous. So one could argue that would be the number then.
One could.
Yeah. Okay.
In the operation and maintenance fund, we're expecting an increase of 3.4%. Salaries 2.7%, employee benefits up 3%, purchase services up 5.9%, supplies and materials 3.8%. So the operation and maintenance fund for new board members funds all our custodial salaries, all of our maintenance salaries, and all expenses related to operating our facilities. Telephones, electricity, custodial supplies, those type of expenditures. The capital projects fund, as defined by, I think it was Mr. Zimmerman, that we sold our bonds to do some capital improvements last year, and that's why that fund has the type of reserves that it has.
And Becky, has any budgetary additions been made? Because there was some discussion here, and I'm not quite sure where we left that off, on whether we were going to build in 500,000, $1 million for capital improvements as we go forward.
That will, if you saw the last financial projections, that increase started in the 2016-17 school year.
Right.
What was it again?
When we were adding the,
Right.
What was the amount?
the last version that I gave you was 2.5. That's sitting in
2.5
our
per year?
Yes.
I thought that was too high. Did we?
You said 2 to 4, right? Was the range 2 to 4%?
2 to 4%.
Annually?
We were thinking you just said 2.5 million.
I thought you said 2.5 million.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was more like 500,000.
It's in the financial, the last version of financial projections you saw, it had 2.5 million.
For 16, 17, 18 going
Right,
forward.
right.
Okay.
Right.
So we need to lower
But it's not in this year's budget. It will be a number that affects the 16-17 budget.
Okay, all
But
right.
it drastically affects the financial forecast.
Yes, it does. And so those are decisions that you have to make in the future.
Which, Tony, I immediately asked Becky this morning, can I see it today? And I was told no. So that will be your successors, at least if this board member isn't any saying it, that model will be my highest priority for that individual.
And it always is in September. It always is in September. And then the transportation fund in the purchase service area, you're seeing a 12% increase in that area, and that has to do with the transportation. We are bringing somebody in this summer to look at our routes once we've created them, and they'll be in mid-July. So if we can make any efficiencies before we notify anybody, that will be done.
And What about the $7,000 per quarter for the new vehicle purchases? Is that
That's in the O&M fund.
That's an O&M?
Right.
Okay.
So Becky, so I know we're comparing budget numbers here, and I know we were surprised to see that our bus expenditure for transportation was significantly higher than anticipated. So I guess a question I was asking earlier today was, what is our actual sort of bus transportation for this year? Because I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I think we underestimated on our 14-15 budget, but is this 15-16, is this close to what we're paying this year actually, even though it's showing a high increase budget to budget, and I know we want to look at our routing and see if there's any savings?
I'm meeting with the Lakeview people next week to go over the invoices and make sure that we have a clear indication as to what the cost will be next year. So this is a line item that will most likely be adjusted.
Down?
I don't think so.
Well, I guess, so how did we come up with this budget number then
The budget was developed based upon our average cost per month.
for this, that we're
Right.
experiencing currently?
Breaking
Okay.
it down to a daily rate times 180 days for next
So
year.
theoretically, this should be about what we're experiencing.
Theoretically.
Okay, thank you.
The retirement fund is employee benefits only, and it is the statutory requirements made payable to the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, Social Security and Medicare. Social Security is paid for all support staff individuals, and Medicare is paid, the Medicare portion of the Social Security rate is paid for all employees. The Tort Immunity Fund, as I said earlier, is our insurance fund. You'll see a budget decrease here, and that's because last year we did security enhancements out of the Tort Immunity Fund, and there are not the available dollars to do it out of there this year. This will all be updated for September. Actually, you'll see a draft of it in August, with where the actuals will have been incorporated, and the comparisons will then be between the budget and the actuals for June 30th, so it kind of changes the whole dynamics of the budget. Revenue should be updated, and so that you should have a really good picture the beginning of August and when you finally adopt it in its final form in September. Questions, comments, or concerns? This is probably the longest time I've done the budget.
You just talked about cash days on hand, and I moved forward to page 46, where you state the tentative budget projects an operating fund balance of $49.7 million or 69.8%. How does that relate to days on hand? Page 46?
I don't have it on the computer.
Yeah,
So
it's fund balance policy is the title of it.
I haven't broken it down to that level again, and I typically wouldn't do that until we're.
25.
Well, it'd be way
yeah.
over if our budget's 70-some million and we're talking that we'd have 50 million in the bank. We'd be
Remember I said
way
we'd be
over.
about 70% of,
Oh, yeah.
fund balance, right?
It's page 25
Right,
based on
right.
this.
I haven't
So-
broken it down to days cash on hand, but we can certainly look at that.
Yeah. I just wanted to get a number. I realize it's over 120, but
That was Board Member Zimmerman's question this morning.
yeah.
But I would tell you that when you look at the revenues that are built into this budget and the expenses that are built into this budget, if you go back to that statement of position, which was one of the first slides that I showed you, and I made the statement that this really tells the whole picture, that 1.4 million swing is really an improvement from what we showed you in February,
Yes.
which is good news.
Yes. The projections, the projections for expenses for this budget will be the final year of contracted expenses for PREA for staff, correct? And then
The PREA and the PRTAA.
RETAA, right. So once your projections, therefore, going forward are just continuing the assumptions.
Correct. Continues the current contract going forward.
Gotcha. Any board member questions for Becky?
Do we, are we going into further detail, or should I ask questions?
Go right ahead, Bob.
Supplemental
You can
material
ask
that you
questions
provided?
that you want.
Sure.
Okay. So, I guess if you're on the electronic packet, it's page 35 on this, the paper one you provided, Becky, page 14. I just was trying to understand under the benefits section where we showed reductions in like retirement, TRS, health insurance, reductions, retirement incentive. Could you just explain why we anticipate those numbers to be less?
In benefit consultants is our actual, it's just based upon our actual costs, and we'll underspend that budget this year. So I'm going from the bottom to the top.
Okay.
Retirement, TRS, health insurance in the PREA contract. There's an item in there for retirement benefits that has been there long before I got here that gives them so much per month towards their health insurance with the teacher retirement system. It's called TRIP. We will pay $600 per month until the age of 65 or Medicare eligible. We have several people coming off this year.
Okay.
So that's the good news there. The retirement incentive is last year, I think may have been the last year where we had to pay penalties and
Those phased out.
incidental fees associated with the retirements, and that's why the saving is there.
Okay. If somebody else has a question, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one unless, Dathan, you look like you were poised, so I just want to make sure I didn't cut you off. My question is somewhat with some numbers and a little bit with the direction the district is going in terms of professional development. One thing, and I don't know that we've received the report on it yet, you know, I have sensed over the years that we put these opportunities out there and they're not always 100% attended. Sometimes we're disappointed with the attendance, and I know we push for it, and I'm a big believer in professional development. So philosophically, my question is, should we do we budget based on what we hope people will attend? You know, if we're going to have a seminar on something and we hope all the teachers will show up, do we budget for them? Or if you send 10, does it cost the same as sending all of them? I'm kind of trying to understand the professional development fees, because as I looked through the blue pages and the numbers, we were spending in the various categories pretty consistent amounts until last year's budget, and they all jumped up. And then when I look at the spend rate for this year,
It's
we're
way down.
consistent with what those former years were. Yet I see next year's budget being super high, and I'm on the blue pages 2 and 3. If
I
you're
know
looking
exactly where you're
section
at,
2.
right.
And I'm wondering if it's appropriate to maybe budget in historic year time frame as opposed to, because I mean, it looks like it's $200,000-$300,000 over what we budgeted in its aggregate over those 4 or 5 line items.
When we adopted the budget this year, we talked about the very large increase in the budget.
Right.
And we talked about it in the context of administrative contracts, where we shifted to, if you'll recall, several years ago, we made the benefit for administrators $3,500 per year. And that if you didn't spend your money, you could carry it forward.
Okay.
And so that when we looked at the spend for the previous couple years, that's all we spent. Not every administrator was accessing and spending their allotment.
Okay.
The budget last year of $137,293 accommodated everybody's current year in addition to what their carryover was.
Oh.
With the expectation that we may be doing more professional development this year than we've done in the past. That has not come to be the case. Again, the budget is going back to a level of $3,500 per administrator, because that line item basically is just administration, plus their carryover,
Okay.
based upon what it was. And it's likely that we won't, our spend will probably be close to what we've spent the last couple of years. So that is an area that you could be reducing, understanding that you have a contractual obligation.
Right, but we've never experienced 100%.
We've never experienced that.
Of it being, and then, and of these line items, just so I understand, that is the line 3146, professional growth, is that where that is?
Right.
Where is it where we educate our teachers and encourage them to attend different seminars so that they can be more effective in the classroom? Which line items are those? I'm just curious.
Staff development,
Okay, so that's. okay,
right,
3142. Okay.
3142.
Okay.
Workshops, 3141.
Uh-huh.
And then there's something called the career incentive,
Mhm.
3147. That amount is included in the PREA contract, and there's a professional development committee that actually approves whatever professional growth that teachers may be doing.
Okay. Okay.
So where's the tech folks in there?
The tech folks are also in those line items for workshops and staff development.
Okay. All right, thank you. I just saw that kind of going up and around. I thought I'd ask. Thanks.
I have a yellow tab on that in the more greater detail I carry around.
Did you have a question? No? Oh, okay. So just looking at, I was looking at the page regarding revenues, Becky, and just sort of this higher level summary, I guess. And the
We call that the Eric Kulik report.
And an extended daycare revenue for next year's budget is significantly greater than this year's. Is that based on that an actual experience we've had
Correct,
this
right.
year? So we're budgeting that.
We've had some conversations in the last several weeks, could be 4 weeks, about maybe limiting the number of kids that actually come to that. So that may be another line item that is adjusted prior to final budget adoption.
Okay. And then behind tab 2, the expenditures, the supplies number is down about 7%. Is this where the Chromebooks appear or something?
Yes.
In their budget?
Right.
So even though we've significantly, we had a large expenditure last year, this year that line we're only expecting to really go down by about 7%.
Right. If you look at the education fund, if you look at the yellow document that follows that, and if you look under the education fund, that top section, you'll see supplies are going down 268, 10.3%.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would have expected a larger decline.
Well, there will be. Remember, one of the first things I said up front is that I hadn't factored in those additional reductions. So I'm waiting to get those entries from the administration.
Okay. And then I guess just going to the blue pages then.
Are we revenue or expenses?
We're in expenses.
Okay.
I noticed that in the past we'd had a Jefferson Summer Day Camp, but that's not in the budget
That's
this year?
a park district program.
Okay, so previously we had some.
We ran it until last summer, and this year it's going to be a park district program.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. And then I noticed our postage expense being higher by 25%. And just thinking about everything moving electronically these days and everything, I know postage rates do increase, but not 25%. So I'm just wondering why we're anticipating something of that nature.
Financial report postcard?
We've got an allocation in there to the annual report being mailed and.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand. Okay, so
Postcards for the financial report, Bob, and then the annual report that's going to be hard copy delivered to everybody.
Okay. So communication, okay, good. So, and then also and I know there was talk before, about copy paper and stuff. I see our copier machine budget being 11.5% higher in the future.
It's usage, that per click copy.
So it's just interesting to me, even with them one-to-one and smart boards and everything, our copier expense keeps going up. I just conceptually doesn't make sense to me. Anybody has any
I don't
thought
think
on
it makes
that?
sense to anyone I know in the professional world. It's exactly the same thing. We have more gadgets and we got more paper being printed.
Because you can see that I printed these reports on April 17th, and our year-to-date expend is almost to the budget for this year. So we will overexpend that line item, which is why the budget increased.
I know that the total volume of paper utilized today in business is greater.
Yeah.
And it increases every year, even though technology increases every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We still like to touch and feel that
Yeah.
paper.
I don't want to cut anyone off. I just had two other questions, just so I understand changes in the budget. The, in the blue papers, same area where Bob was, the teacher's assistants seem to be going up. Did something change, or just is that it?
You know, I cost out teacher assistants based upon actual staff.
Okay.
And we have a lot of TAs who have been here a very long time, which means that they're moving over a longevity step as well as an incremental step.
Okay. And then there's just one other item here, 93190, and sorry, I'm sort of hovering in the same area, but it was other professional services, and that seemed to jump quite a bit. You know, I don't pay attention as much to the 100,000 or the 100% jumps when it's $4,000, but when it's, you know, 40-some thousand, I'm kind of curious
You'll
about the 96%.
see some decreases in other areas through the budget. So
So
if
this
you,
is-
right,
Moving money.
correct.
Okay.
Bob, did you have a question?
Yeah, Becky, so going further back in the report, looking at the, and I guess it's in the capital projects component, and looking at the architect fees that we're projecting, and I know we're doing a lot of work right now. I'm not sure exactly how much of that will be, you know, is in the current fiscal year's budget, but was just wondering, is this architect fees budget here of $250,000, which is significantly less than the past couple of years, and I just think about how involved we must be right now. Is this conceived to be an accurate assumption?
If we pay for the second installment of the facility master plan in June, yes, then should be a pretty accurate number.
Okay.
I have a question, pretty fundamental question. If you go back to page 26, at least on our computerized thing, and that's that big graph that shows the statement of position. And according to that, the subtotal operating funds is actually in a excess of 1.396.285,
Correct.
which I was ecstatic to see.
Yeah, me too.
But when I went to these pages and I did simple math, and it's the new math, so it may be wrong, but I took the 15, 16 tentative budget total expenditures, and I subtracted the 15, 16 tentative budget of total revenues, and I wound up with a deficit of $932,635.
I'd have to look and see where you're carrying numbers in it. You may be looking at total operating funds instead of just the subtotal with the capital projects in there. So I'd want to be able to compare numbers to numbers with you.
Well, if you look at these pages, I'm looking at a page that says Park Ridge-Niles Community Consolidated School District.
What color?
15, what color? It's
So is
the,
it one behind tab 1 and the other's behind tab 2, I think?
Exactly.
perhaps?
Okay.
exactly. So one's in the blue and one's in the blue.
Well, those pages include all funds, so it includes both the debt service fund and the capital projects fund. So you'd have to go to the bottom, total all funds, where you see a deficit of $932,635.
I don't see the.
When you did the math in your head, did you actually come out with 932,635?
Well, I don't trust my head. I use this.
On the
And what I did was, if you look at the bottom, the very bottom, it's in a green shaded number. And for the tentative revenue, 867.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I took that as my revenue.
Right. That includes the debt service fund and the capital projects fund.
So should you back that out?
Right, and that's why you if you go up 1, 2, 3, 4 lines where it says subtotal operating funds.
If you go to page 26 on the computer, the
Yeah, right at the bottom.
last number under total all funds is the exact number that you came up with, 932,635,
Right.
which is the total of all the.
So you got to back that out.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. It's what happens when you've been on the board for 6 years. So-
I'm still looking for budget 101 classes.
I'd be glad to give it to you anytime that you want.
Well,
I have an open door.
Between now and June 25th.
June 26th.
Becky, just a, it's not a numbers question, just a general question. If the district were ever to experience something where we had to pay some sort of settlement or something from some legal situation, would that be paid out of this tort fund in one of the categories?
It depends on what type of settlement. Whether you issued bonds, depending on the level of the settlement. So it's not an easy question. It may have to come out of the ed fund. It depends.
So is, in general, would you say is this tort fund then really?
It buys
create
insurance.
the insurance, and
Right.
is that where we pay for legal counsel also?
No, we pay for legal counsel out of the education fund.
Okay, so just insurance, okay.
Okay, wasn't this fun?
So Becky, that 932, does the administration feel, knowing the plan of the referendum, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever it is, and the idea was to build up those reserves, crest, and then to start spending them down, knowing we would eventually at one point in time come to a point where we were in a deficit, and that was the plan originally many, many years ago. The amount, this seems to be the first year where we're kind of cresting, right? The amount that we're dipping, are we, and I know this is part of that projection I always talk about, but are you guys as administration comfortable that crest is okay, that it's not this year as you look at this budget coming down too precipitously, or is it, this is in line with what the plan, maybe even a little bit later than you'd like?
Actually, if you look at the line item that says subtotal operating funds, that's what the referendum commitment was made upon. And so we're still showing a surplus right now.
So we're probably, given the original promises of the referendum in 07,
We're
probably
still-
doing it a little bit better than maybe they had forecasted.
Well,
then.
they had forecasted during the referendum campaign that you would be working on a referendum right now.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's good.
We should be, based on the '07 referendum, we should be deficit spending right now,
Absolutely.
and we're not.
Should have
Right,
been
we're
for the
not
last
on
several
operating
years.
funds. Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because that's something I think we all hold dear, and so I wanted to make sure that we were,
Doing a good job.
at least, not failing.
So, and I've just got another question in terms of the document that sort of was behind your initial memo, Becky, the
Okay.
2015-16 investments in student learning, and maybe we'll see if Lori Lopez is alive back there. Just when we're talking about the next generation science standards, so do we anticipate that there's going to be any additional expense? I know that there was just recently, in fact, we know with the implementation of the PARCC testing, we saw that science testing disappeared, and then I thought I heard that the Illinois State Board of Education was just notified that they were actually in violation of some sort of edicts or whatever, and that we would need to, basically it sounded like the federal government was saying, you need to have science testing. So do we anticipate that anything's going to occur for this coming school year? And, how do we deal with that? Are we going to have extra expenses associated with getting our staff ready for that?
The science committee, you can come up, Laura, but the science committee continues to work. They've decided to hold on looking at any resources and purchasing any resources, because they really are in the early phases of development. So I don't know that there's going to be any large expenses this year in terms of materials, but I would say professional development, because we have to get the staff up to speed over the next couple of years on the changes found in the new science standards.
Exactly. We've reserved some of our professional development time for this upcoming year to focus on the NGSS standards, but at this time we don't have a plan to work with a consultant. We're using a train the trainer model, so we'll be doing some introductory activities hosted by our committee members who actually worked with a consultant this past year.
Okay.
And as Dr. Hines said, we're sort of in the gap right now. The standards have been adopted by the state of Illinois, but the vendors haven't caught up with the standards yet. So we've identified a rubric that sort of helps you take a look at the next generation science standards and look really closely at curriculum materials and see if they are aligned to the standards. So we're meeting with some vendors this summer and pulling together a small subcommittee of members from the science committees to take a look at what's out there. But we did go to the NSTA science conference this past spring in Chicago, and we did not see anything that we thought addressed really the rigor of the standards.
Okay. And also I noted here where we talked about, the for the Common Core, and creating the pacing guides, and supporting the implementation of the curriculum. So we'll be going into year 3 of the Common Core curriculum, I guess. And what are we thinking in terms of how, going into year 3, so the pacing guides, how long do we anticipate that sort of continuing till maybe we have some, like a mastery in a sense of how to deal with math and reading and the Common Core?
Certainly the pacing guides are a product that we create based on our experience with the implementation of the standards. So year 3 might seem like a long time to continue our work on that, but it's really an evolving product. So in year 1, we really focused on the shifts in instruction that needed to happen for teachers to understand the standards. So we did a lot of professional development around what the standards are and what explicitly would change in terms of teaching around the standards. And we focused on really the adoption of our new math materials. And with the adoption of our new math materials, we have identified, by looking more closely at our MAP scores, and in consultation with teachers through grade level meetings, we've identified places where our curriculum is very strong, and we've identified places where we see gaps. One of the most interesting things about the adoption of the Common Core standards is that our students who are struggling the greatest with the transition to the standards are students in higher grades, right? Especially in something like math, which is taught fairly sequentially. There's a scope and sequence to the curriculum. So we're finding that there are places in the curriculum where we need to address different concepts for students. And the pacing guides have helped us with that. The other thing that the pacing guides have done is they've really helped us map what supplemental resources teachers are identifying to support student learning. So it's sort of a place where everybody can put their best ideas for assessment and lesson plans related to chapters. I think the first time you work through any curriculum, your pacing is off, right? Some of that is because it's new curriculum material, and teachers haven't had a chance to respond to students in a way that they can predict how students will respond to the material. But some of that is also because, as I said, students have had different curricular experiences, and so teachers are spending a lot of time doing those pre-testing experiences to see where they are.
I'd like to take Bob's thought just one step forward. We've got a real good background now on the budget for the 15-16 year. And what I'd like to throw out there for MJ and Jane and Scott and everybody who's sitting in the audience, I'm not so much worried about this budget because I think we already have this almost buttoned down. I mean, obviously there's going to be, as the numbers come in, it'll be modified, but it seems to be a typical Becky Allard budget. It's solid, it's all inclusive. It just needs a little touch up as the final numbers come in. But I'm interested from each of your perspectives, what do you anticipate? Because I'm really focusing on the 2021 goal. And beyond this budget, what are we looking at for the 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19 years? Things that are going to be affecting the long-range capital projections. That's really what I'm concerned about. I mean, this is like looking through a telescope or a microscope, if you will, down into 1 year. But I'd like to see how this budget actually correlates or impacts what we're going to be doing over the next 5 years. So are there any looming huge headaches? And hopefully they'll be 5 years from now, because I don't think I'll be on the board by then. But are there anything going to be, Scott may, I mean, but are there any looming big things that anybody can think of that we, need to start planning for? And it's just a thought that occurred to me. I mean, Bob started this with a very good thought, What are we looking at that is going to negatively impact this budget or next year's budget? And I just want to take that out at least for the next 3 years. Anybody have anything?
I think that our ability to answer that question is going to be much more clear and in focus, to use your analogy,
Strategic plan.
with the strategic plan. We're building a 5-year vision, a 2020 vision. One of the things, Dr. Lopez and I have been talking about is a multi-year grid by content area or by department. Once we have the strategic plan, color coding something to say, when is something going to be in study, when is it going to be in implementation, when are we in refinement, so we can map out across our whole organization who's being impacted by what initiatives. So not only are we balancing workflow and load, but we can also do a long and short-term kind of budget rollout based on those two documents.
So will that be incorporated, as you foresee it, will that be incorporated into financial projections as we go forward?
Yes.
And now, will that still be a once-a-year discussion, or will we be doing that more often? What's the plan on that, so that we keep abreast? I mean, there was some discussion in the prior board that any discussion on capital expense be automatically reconfigured into, this must be also something else you asked this morning?
This has been my desire for many years now. I just firmly believe if we want to keep our eyes on getting to a goal, or maybe even beyond, we need to think of a way to make the tool we use for forecasting more real time. So I know right now the tool we've moved to, it's challenging to do it as quickly as I've asked for, as others have asked for. And I don't know if the solution is a different tool, or we need to find a resource like a half-a-time person in the finance department to work on it. But I think this board would be well served if we could have an instrument where every time we look at spending money, it can tell us precisely how far it gets that burn down chart for the 120 days to meeting our goal. Because if we're going to go spend $100,000 here or $20,000, well, maybe there'll be a threshold. But the idea is, whenever we're going to look at this, whenever we're going to look at salary changes, whenever we're going to look at capital expenditures, it should always be discussed through the lens of this tool, so that we can, when you come and say, I want a new VoIP system, not that you'll need one for many years, but whatever the next VoIP system is, it should come as a proposal with that attached to the back, so that we know, all else being steady, you change this, here's what it does to
So
the
you
impact.
will be I'm just going to make your night.
I'm hoping you will. I've been asking for a while.
So two things. So MJ and Allison are looking at the dashboards, and we have that on the docket to talk with you about later this spring. We just recently signed on with a company called Forecast 5, and they will do projections on an as-needed basis, a monthly basis. So that's a tool we're going to layer into those PMA projections, and
Because I think, Tony, that would
it's
do
coming.
exactly what we're looking for, right? So that way, every time we want to look at spending money, we can say, okay, this is the decision and it's neutral, or we know if we're going to make these 2 or 3 big decisions, 2021 is probably not realistic anymore. Are we comfortable with that? Or, hey, you know what, if we could maybe change this a little, we can get to 2022.
Or would it potentially give us a greater clarity on some trade-offs?
Right.
I mean, that's the other flip side of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited.
Good.
You made
What if scenarios?
Yep.
Okay. Any further questions for Becky? If not, thank you very much.
And tonight isn't the end of this discussion. Again, I've always had an open door policy, and I respond to emails quickly. So if you have questions regarding the budget, don't hesitate to email, call, stop by.
And Becky, if I recall correctly, this isn't the first time us or the public will have an opportunity to
Correct.
discuss this. If memory serves, in past years, you've come back somewhere around the July time frame with something, and then we've come back in September to finally adopt.
Right.
Is that the plan this year?
If you look at the written document, page 11 of the written narrative, it's got the budget calendar in there. I'd like to point out a couple of things. It will come back on August 10th with the transition, me leaving, Luann coming in I didn't think the July board meeting would give her adequate time to prepare the documents for you. So August 10th, you will get the next version of the budget with the actual June 30th unaudited actuals. And you'll adopt it on a tentative basis and put it on public display. You'll adopt the budget on September 28th. You'll notice that I put in red on October 26th that the board should have a discussion about what the assumptions should be into the financial projection so that we don't end up with what we ended up this year. Is capital in there or is it not? So you'll be able to have that discussion so that it's clear when they bring it back in February what's in there and what's not.
I think just getting that capital stuff out of there is going to make it a lot clearer. That's been messing up the numbers for 3 years now. One thing I might suggest for the second and third go-round at this, I can't remember who made the suggestion. It might have been Bob, it might have been Scott, it might have been John for all I know, but it was a good suggestion. And that suggestion was showing the changes between the first version and the second version and the second version and the third version. And I found that very helpful to see as we went through.
In tab 3, you've got tab 3, but there's nothing behind it today. So behind door number 3, you'll see, as we always have, every time we bring you back another version, we say we've changed this, we've changed that. We usually use 10,000 as the threshold. So if we're changing something great, plus or minus 10,000, or plus 10,000, we tend to, or reduce something greater than 10,000. We tend to outline that and demonstrate that to you. That way you can track what we're doing.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay.
Becky, thank you for your last board presentation. Nice job.
On the budget.
On the budget. That's true.
Yeah, on the budget. Thanks.
3 more to go.
Okay, well, we're not done with this one yet, and since it's not 10:30, we have a little bit of time. It's not on the agenda, but certainly as per the Open Meeting Act that I just went through, I realize that we can talk but not take action on different items if the board is willing to discuss it. And since we don't want to necessarily take action on this, but I thought, since we're all here, and I've been sending out incessant emails on this topic, it's the committee structure. And we're going to have to deal with this at some point anyway. And if we just took 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, just so that we're all on the same ballpark, we can have more of a robust discussion at a later point. Lori suggested that we do this at our board get-together that we have over the summer. I think that might be a little too late, though, because that may happen in June, may happen in, well, it's not going to happen in August, so may happen in July, may happen in September, depending on when that finally touches down. That really might be too late. We'll miss several months there. So, Scott, if you kind of agree that might be too late, we could start the discussion anyway. And the traditional, if I may, the traditional, in my one of the letters that I sent out, the traditional format was that there was 14 board committees, 2 members per committee, that's 28 divided by 7. So everybody was assigned 4 different committees. That was the 13 to 15 year. The 15 to 17 board, actually there's less committees. There's now only 11. BATC and some of the other ones have been eliminated. But we still have a list, and I forwarded this list to everybody. But I looked at this list, and I thought, man, does the board really want to spend their time doing board functional work on some of these committees where that time and energy could be better spent on board work, which is, to me, long-range projections, overseeing, the ultimate output, benefits to the district. Could it be better spent in other areas? Well, then I went and I looked up the IASB recommendations, and I sent that letter to you, and I wrote a 2 or 3 page letter, and it kind of summarized what the IASB recommends about committees. And they said, basically, be careful with committees. You want to have board function on committees. You don't want to have administration or staff function on some of these committees. And I totally get that.
Does everybody understand what he means by that? There's boards have a role, and administration has a role. And we want to make sure that we stay out of each other's sandboxes in terms of who needs to do what. So Barb Toney, if you remember, she worked with at least the 5 of us that are here, 6 of us that are here, worked with us last year on expectations, roles, governance. And one of the things we didn't get to during our 2 days together was committees and the structure and what needs to be in place in order for committees to be successful. She also has a workshop that she talks about what might be useful committees that are very board, appropriate. So Tony went on and did some research, and you saw that email that he sent out. We're just trying to figure out what that might look like. And then on these certain committees, what really would be the purpose and the role? What might the calendar look like? What might the structure look like? So that's kind of where we are right now.
And an excerpt that I could share with you is, therefore, board committees, when they are needed to assist the board in decision-making, should do pre-board work, not sub-board work. They may work on matters before the board does, but at the board level. They should not work below the board level or at the staff level. And that makes a lot of sense. And when I look at the current committee structure, I see really there should be an administrative presence reporting to the board. There's nothing for the board to work on some of these committees doing board work at that level, other than reporting. And frankly, I think that if you have to go to a meeting, you'd rather go to a meeting that's going to actually have board work to it rather than just sitting there and being an observer. So therefore, I kind of made a suggestion. And I made a suggestion in another letter that I sent out. And that was to create basically 6 committees, but of the 6, 1 becomes a committee of the whole. And that would be on curriculum. That would leave standing committees for communication, facilities, finance, policy, and negotiations, which are basically, in my mind, after the few years I've been on the board, the antithesis of what we're trying to accomplish as a board. The areas that did I use the right word? No?
Antithesis is opposite.
Oh, well, I didn't mean that.
That's okay.
Yeah.
The epitome.
Yes.
The foundation of what we're trying to accomplish on the board. And that is board governance in these specific areas. It turns out that even in 2011, when I got on the board, we decided at that time, the board set up its goals. There was finance, facilities, communication, and curriculum. And my first 2 years on the board established as its goals those 4 areas. And 2 years ago, in 2013, the board readopted those goals. Now, frankly, going forward, when we have our retreat, hopefully we'll have the strategic plan. I'm hoping the board will adopt the strategic plan as its goal and then concentrate on certain areas of the strategic plan to really hone in on. I mean, that's to me what it would make a lot of sense going forward. And these committees, therefore, would basically be a check on the functionality of the implementation of the strategic plan. I mean, that's just how I'm kind of evolving my thought process with this. When we broke this down, I mean, we can do the fine-tuning on what those individuals are going to do in these committees, but it still breaks it down to the very basics of what the board should be doing, and that is in communication. Are we getting our message out to the community? I mean, we've been talking that, Scott, for at least 4 years since I've been on the board, and I still don't think that, well, I do know we have a long ways to go to achieve that, to make sure that everybody in the community, not just folks who send their children to us, but everybody in the community who pays taxes understands what's going on with our group. Facilities. We just spent $19 million in the last 3 years, and we have a long ways to go, and people need to know. And that's part of communication, but it's also the board needs to know what's going on. Finance, not only the communication aspect of finance, but maintaining a lid on long-term projections and really delving into these numbers so that the board can look at this from the one step back. We're not going to start directing budgets, and we have a process for that, but we have to look at these numbers and crunch the numbers. Negotiation speaks for itself, and policy. My first 2 years I was on the policy committee, and Dathan, I know you were on the policy committee. Were you ever on it? Lucky guy. Reading the footnotes and the big chunks of papers that come through. It's just a laborious process, but it's critical because policy is essentially one of the three main things that the board does.
One of your pillars, yeah.
We set policy, we set a budget, and we hire a
Evaluate.
superintendent. That's the three things we do. That's it. So it would seem that having a policy committee would be necessary to have board function. So that's my thoughts on this whole process, and I throw it out there to start the conversation to see what everybody thinks about this, and I do this because I specifically, as well-intentioned and well-meaning as they were, when I go back to the previous board assignments, and I'm on it right now, but do we really need to have a board member assigned to the medical advisory committee, and why can't a administrator be at that meeting and report back to the board?
I am, so I can take that on, yep.
Insurance committee. I know, Scott, you've been on the insurance committee, but a lot of that work, that's not board work. And you report back to the board. It's interesting.
Right.
It's very interesting, but you're not doing any board work on that committee.
Luann and I would have that covered for the upcoming year.
Traffic safety committee, same issue.
I attend those meetings.
So I find that these are, they're valuable, they're great to sit in, they're great to hear about, but we're not getting anything done.
No, I would agree with you, Tony. I think this is overdue, and I think it's a great idea, and I think you're headed in the right direction. And I articulated it to you in an email, as long as the administration is comfortable that, the insurance committee doesn't feel the need for a board member being present. And those are ones I'm not as concerned about, but one or two that did come to my attention would be like the PTO presidents and ELF. We sometimes take the role of ambassador in that place, and us being there sort of facilitates the communication objective and certainly the goodwill objective with those really important institutions, and when we used to have the community finance committee similarly. So I agree, I'd like to pare this down. I would just like to think about some of those committees where our role isn't necessarily board work, but it is sort of related to the communication goal. Where I agree with you, having been on both traffic safety and insurance, I kind of just sit there and listen and nod, and it's interesting work, and I'm happy to help however I can. But and they'll look at me and say, "Well, would the board ever do this?" And how can I answer that?
Right, with one member you can't.
Right, exactly, precisely. So I see the need for it, but maybe a discussion on are there any others that maybe there's value in someone showing up and representing the board presence.
Well, I thought of that, and it's a good way to look at things as we're doing outreach.
Right.
But I'm wondering if in that particular forum that is effective outreach. For instance, around election time, Bob and I had the opportunity of visiting with a lot of the PTO groups. I can tell you, that was tremendous outreach. The feedback that we got from those groups in that forum where everybody was not constrained, they were free to talk, free to make comments. Bob and I answered as best we can with historical accounts of what we knew. But there were questions that came up, and I flat out said, I don't know. And I would come back, and that's what started the whole transportation thing, and we got some tremendous feedback. So if the concept is being or having a board member on the committee as outreach, I would say, well, the board member can only speak about what he or she knows, certainly can't do any action, can take some questions back to the board, but in most instances that can be done through administration. And if we replace that with a different form of outreach, and I'm whether anybody else wants to do it or not, I want to do it. I'm personally going to continue to personally visit each and every PTO just because it was such a good feedback. And I'm wondering if outreach is what you're looking for, I think we can get better outreach in a different format than in that particular manner.
Yeah,
And
I'm
then-
open to all ideas. I've just never been on those committees, so I know, Vicki,
Yeah.
you have, I think,
Well,
Bob, you were on ELF, right? If I'm not
And I
mistaken.
thought you brought up a really good point, because I was on EdRed. I sit there, it's informational, but again, there's nothing for me to report on or do. It's fun, nice to have, not need to have. But the PTO president meetings are, I feel, that is a good one. And it is similar to going to their meetings at night. You have the president, they're more talking about the programs. Lori usually schedule those when we have a meeting that night. We can talk about hot topics. It's just one board member's opinion, but I do think that one's helpful.
And I go to the PTA and PTO meetings as well, so I'm in on those meetings, plus I attend the PTA, PTO president meetings that we have. It's about every other month. So we're doing that outreach. I do feel strongly that somebody, at least one person, needs to be on EdRed with me, especially with everything that's happening in the state right now, and then FedRed at the federal level. We need to be at those meetings and informed. They have good speakers, their topics are timely, and they have a lot of finance. They're finance focused because of everything that we're facing as a state. So I would hate to see that one go. They're in the evening, we go to dinner at the, whatever space is holding them, and I think it's important. I would hate not to have board representation on that one.
Well, we certainly could add that. That's
Well,
not an issue.
it sounds like we're doing two different things. Number one, we're coming up with a more, a narrower focus of what a committee is, but we don't want to throw out board involvement with certain things. I mean, we can go to a FedRed, whatever it's called,
FedRed, FedRed,
meeting
there's two.
without a committee, and we can go to PTO
Right.
meetings without a committee. So we have to figure out, are all of our board meetings outside of this, or are all of our board activities outside of this under committees, or are we doing something
Participation.
different?
An activity.
Yeah, an activity, yes, a play date with certain
Right.
things, okay? So, yeah, or are we only gonna do committee work? That's really what we're trying to figure out, because it sounds like those things are very valuable. Are we doing those under the auspices of a committee? That's what we need to
Great
decide.
Right, no, that's a tremendous distinction, because a committee, obviously, is going to be doing background work, they're going to be doing research, they're going to be formulating theories, testing theories, getting research to prove theories, and then bring those results back to the board and say, look what we have found, we spent some time in this, and this is what we came back, versus an activity where you go and you report back. You say, hey, it was a great time. But you're absolutely right. And therefore, based on that comment, we should participate in EdRed, FedRed, Fred Dunker's, right, hamburger place. But the long and the short of it is, to me, that would be an activity, not a committee. Same thing with the PTO. And yeah, sure, you can go and do that. That's great. But, no true board research, investigative analysis, analytical work is going to be done at that level that we need to do as a board, which is going to be pushing the goals of the district down the road.
I guess one question that I would ask is it more beneficial to have one person consistently doing those activities, or would the committees, or not the committees, but the administration and the board itself and the community be better served if we all took turns doing those things? That we all should be going to those things, but we can't all do it all the time.
Because then
So-
you're having a board meeting.
What's that?
Then you're having a meeting. so you have
Exactly.
to be-
So, maybe we should be taking turns with some of these activity things that are outside of committees.
Yeah, I actually, as Vicki was saying, I was thinking that you just articulated, and I think that we could rotate on something like that. Everybody needs to get a flavor of that. More importantly, let the other people in that group get to meet each one of us.
Right.
Do a
And that's
little-
better outreach than the same person showing up to the meetings. Because then it
Exactly.
almost feels like, oh, here's the same person, don't the other board members care? When we all are interested in what's going on in PTOs and PTAs and stuff like that.
And that would be something to divide and conquer. If you guys each assign yourselves to a school, you can, hit a meeting or two over the course of a year that, kind of flanks mine, because I hit a couple each year. And
No.
the same thing with EdRed.
The only thing that it needs to have is, there has to be a constant, and that would be the administrative representative.
Yeah.
That's the constant. It doesn't really matter for us on those things because we're coming in, coming out, going in, coming out. There's no board work getting done anyway. So to have a constancy of board participation really won't be necessary. So you're absolutely correct. I think that that's not, but there has to be an administrative constant so that there's some carry through. And frankly, having the administrative constant throughout would probably be more important because the administrative representative may span several boards and be able to, therefore, recall different discussions at different periods of time, and may give different perspectives and flavors to the discussions.
And Tom and Mark, the reason I was on AdRed and PTO is those were day meetings, and I'm a stay-at-home mom, so those just worked out for my calendar. You guys were mostly out of work.
So those are my thoughts about kind of presenting this new model, if you will. Now, the hard part, we could talk about it like this, but the hard part is going to be, okay, so we have a finance committee. What do we want that finance committee to do? Now, that may have to wait until the strategic plan gets formulated so that that work goes along with what the strategic plan is going to achieve. I'm with you.
And until our new CSBO takes
Yes.
office.
But I just threw finance out because, I mean, there's
And
other
decides what it's
things.
going to look like.
There's other things on that list. But, so we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but what's the feeling, where are we heading with this? Is this something that you want to have more, this is not going to be settled tonight. I just wanted to throw it out there and just, should I just leave it alone and we'll just go back to the typical standard thing that's always been done? Or do y'all want to just entertain a new concept?
You know
Yes?
me, the
I would like to
fastest way to
entertain
get
it,
my blood
yeah.
pressure to boil is say, let's do it the way we've always done it. I don't like that.
So one, Bob, with your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I think it's good, and I think to your last point, I think is almost the most important is what is that group going to do then? Right. So what's the supposed scope? Basically, what do we hope to get out of this, and not try to interfere with somebody in the administration's job and
Exactly.
things that they're working on already or maybe considered. So I think it's a good idea, and I think we'll just need to decide on sort of those. Some may be very apparent what they are, and some others might be vague. So we need to sort of, I think, get a little more specific.
And I would
with
say
the
when
vague
Tony and I were
ones.
communicating this weekend, that was one of my concerns. As long as we have really clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Think back to Barb, Tony, we talked about what's your work, what's my work, what's our work. We just need to be very clear with that. So for me, I was thinking kind of 4 categories: activities or things to attend. So along Dathan's line of thought, EdRed and PTA, PTO, the president's meetings, plus visiting their meetings. Those seem like things you guys can rotate or pick a building and assign yourself to. Clear-cut, easy committees, policy negotiation, finance, those are all right within your wheelhouse, very, very appropriate for board work. A cow or multiple cows around curriculum as we have big curricular initiatives kind of moving through the process. We can have a cow or two to cover that with Dr. Lopez and the Department of Student Learning. The other 2, I think we need more communication on, and we would certainly need to get the administrators involved in fleshing out what that might look like, or is there truly a need to have a board committee, would be communication and facilities. Those were the 2 that over the weekend, and I thought a lot about it, and it's still not clear in my head as to whether or not I think that we would need a committee. I just don't know how to cover those 2. Both are essential, and I agree we need to do more active outreach beyond the District 64 families. I just don't know what that's going to look like, and if that's your responsibility, or if it's something you want to direct me to do. So I have my monthly newsletter. I'm putting a superintendent advisory council together. I'm certainly doing a lot of outreach within the community. Are there other things you'd like to see me doing in terms of outreach?
The one
Is that
thing
for me to do?
Yeah, the one thing that pops into my head, just for facilities, for instance, is, Scott, you've got it nailed down, and you know what needs to be done on a year-to-year basis. I'm wondering if the board representative would look at the district in toto and realize the various things that need to be done. I mean, you mentioned to me the other day that every time you go through the buildings, you see more and more things. I personally like to get all the asbestos out of here as quick as possible instead of spreading it out a little bit every year. I get that. But I'm wondering, by having a board representative with Scott, that person could look at the total amount of facility needs and start bringing that back to the board so that can be built into the budgetary process for projection purposes. And I say that because in '07, there was no facility thought whatsoever on that referendum, nothing. And I think that facilities need to be factored into the equation for long-term budget projections.
Well, they will be front and center in this strategic plan. Facilities and finance have strands. When we look at our strategic objectives, we have 6. Facilities and finance, we were very purposeful in putting them into this plan because we know moving forward, they have to be front and center because of the strategic plan from 5 years ago that it didn't. So we're in a different place with our facilities now, and that's why we've hired a new architect. We're engaging for the first time in a comprehensive master facility study, so we know what the overall health of our largest assets are, and so on and so forth. So I feel like we are going to have a lot of information and a very solidly developed 5-year plan with long and short-term goals, objectives, built into that strategic plan.
Well, committees would be a way to kind of fill in the gaps. So perhaps, I guess the answer to my second question is going to be the answer to my first question, and that would be, when do you think the strategic plan might be out of a nebulous, gaseous phase into something more concrete that we can look at?
It's coming to the board in June. Is it June 22nd? June 8th. So it's coming soon.
Because this would be a wonderful discussion to have at our board advance.
That's what I was talking to you about. It's great to start this conversation now, but until we have that strategic plan and time to really sit and really talk deeply about committee work and the level of trust that's required, to not do double work, committee work,
that's what I'm
and then you
saying.
come back and want to do the work as a whole board. I mean, we're not, in my humble opinion, we're not kind of there yet. I think we're on the right path, but without the strategic plan and some prep work with the IASB or a representative, if it's not Barb, someone else, I think we're heading very much in the right direction with all of this, but I think we need to spend some time, and I think the advance is the appropriate time to do that.
And does it, before I go on any further, does anybody have any further thoughts about this? And
Well,
if-
I just want to say that I don't want to have meetings just to have meetings, and committees just to have meetings.
Oh, no, there'll be a real reason.
Right, but if we've got this plan, and Scott's working with the plan, they're all working on a plan, and now all of a sudden a board member comes in to get another level of the plan, to me, that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I think I support the idea as you're going around asking people, and I think once you go through each one of them and define exactly what they're going to do, and you see that strategic plan and another one pops out, I think all these questions answer themselves. So, at this point in time, I'd say I really like the idea, and let's talk about it when we have our advance or whatever we're going to have, and whether there's a representative there or not. I think with a strategic plan and us all standing around saying this is what we should talk about, we can probably come up. I mean, sometimes I think we've done our best work when it's just us talking in a room, right?
Right.
Even without guidance.
Agreed.
That's when we said we're going to 21 is when we're going to refinance stuff. I mean, we've kind of hammered it then. I think we ought to sit down in a room and just
do
bang
it.
this out one afternoon.
Just do it. That leads us, of course, to
When?
the ultimate question is when. I know that August it's not going to happen in August. June is too early because we're still not going to have a tangible document to be working with. It'll be a formative document at that point. Is everybody going to be around in July?
I'm here.
Not the last week.
Okay, earlier July would be better.
Should we just maybe send Lori our summer calendars and maybe she can find windows where we're all here and then see if anything aligns with Barb?
Or would you like me to do a doodle? Has anybody ever done
I'll do wherever you want.
Okay, doodles are fun. So what it'll be is I will kind of push something out through your board email that lists dates that I'm available in June or into July. And then you guys pop into the doc, you take a poll, and you check off the dates that work for me that also work for you, and we'll look for one where we're all available, all 8 of us.
Because last summer we did a Saturday, a Friday and a Saturday, what did we do?
Right.
Right.
It was in July.
Fridays and Saturdays.
Historically, it's about 6 o'clock on a Saturday till about 10, on a Friday
Just
night,
to let you guys-
6 to 10, and then Saturday usually 8 until about
3 or
3.
Go dark 30.
8
Not
to
with
3,
me.
or if I'm running at 8 to 5, but,
I found that session extremely valuable.
yeah. So, yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay.
And hopefully we'll come up with a date. Now, Lori's been trying to work out a date for Barb, Tony's, and I'm thinking, get somebody else. I mean, it's more important that we get together and sit down. We can always have Barb come in at a later date for board education purposes, but it's more important for us to get together and start our work rather than wait on Barb Tony.
Yeah, we'll have to see if there's anybody else for the region. That's a pretty skeletal crew.
Yeah.
The IASB. I'll call her back
Do
and
you
see if
think we
there's
need
anybody else.
IASB then? I mean,
Isn't there a legal reason we want ISB there because there's something to do
Provides
with
us,
the Open
yeah.
Meeting Act and
Yep.
everything?
Yeah,
There's a reason we
Yeah.
want them there, Vicki.
no,
that's
but I
why.
thought we talked about it last time.
the reason is that if there's an IASB representative there, you can use that as an exclusion to go into closed
To
session.
talk about certain things covered under exemption.
Yes,
Yeah.
I see.
exactly.
That's right.
Okay.
And if you recall, the entire advance or retreat or whatever you want to call it, last year and the year before that were both in open session.
Right.
And
Well, I take it
recorded.
back. Last year, there was
We
a
did a
small
portion.
section enclosed. The year before that, the first year I ran it, that was, both days were open.
Let me just ask, is there anything that needs to be enclosed that we can foresee on the horizon? We're gonna be talking about us, what we want our goals to be. We're gonna be talking about our committees that we wanna be. I mean, I don't know that we're gonna get into deep conversations about something involving a lawsuit or an
No.
employee moving.
Correct.
I'm just wondering, I mean, whether she's there or not. I think we like to default to being in open when we can.
The reason she would come, and it wouldn't be to come for close, because I agree with you, there
Yeah.
isn't anything that we need or, would cause us to need to go into close. But she would come to do the board orientation in terms of expectations that we went through together last year when I was a new superintendent. I think it's a nice thing for new board members to participate in, because
But you
they're,
guys also had to attend your new training, right?
they're Open Meetings Act, yes, follow me.
9 days.
Which I
But-
think is very helpful.
I wonder if, if scheduling becomes a problem, could that session be at another time in the summer when she
Yes.
is available or something like that? Or even if she's not, where we could maybe have our time, where maybe it's just a Saturday afternoon then since we're breaking it up or whatever, and we just hammer through the issues
Right.
we gotta get through as a
Right.
team. I don't know, just
I think
to
it'd be
not
very
make it so that
productive.
we're waiting until
I
September,
really think it'd be
October, and
productive.
late.
just jump into this
I
stuff.
agree.
And it is certainly an option on how to schedule this. We can do it a Saturday here, a Saturday there,
that's
a
another
Friday
idea.
night here, however you want to do it.
Not too many in
Anybody
the
got a
summer.
late
but-
Yeah, no. We'll make it happen. All right, so I will look at my calendar, I will see if Barb's available, if not, we'll just schedule it, and I will send you a doodle within the
All
next
right.
couple days.
And then there's any other thoughts on this or anything else? Because, anything else on
No.
your part? Because there's one final thing, and I'm going to throw it out there if anybody wants to, and we're going to have to finalize this topic at some point. Go into close pursuant to 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C1, and that would be discussion of a specific employee salary and benefits. And specifically, I'm talking about the superintendent. So, and that has to do with the rolling over the contract and this and that. We've got to establish some baseline, because what's coming up is we have other groups that we're going to have to talk about, administrators, exempt groups. I mean, there's a lot of that. This time of year, Gail gets very, very busy with that, and we're going to have to start having this conversation sooner rather than later. And I thought if we just took a half hour tonight to start this, we can carry it over.
I thought we were doing it on the 18th and closed.
I wanted to start it and then continue it. We're not going to get it done tonight, that's for sure.
Are we allowed to do that without it being on the agenda?
Yes, I believe we can decide to go into closed session.
Yes. You can't act on anything,
Right.
but you can decide to go into a closed if you want to. Anybody have any thoughts about wanting to spend a little time on that tonight? As long as we're here,
As long as we have a clock and we stick to the clock.
okay? It is 9:16. Put a half hour on it, 9:45, we're done.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Is everyone prepared and ready to talk a little bit about this? I know we
Do we
sent some
want
stuff out
Lori
last
here?
time.
Do we
Yeah,
want Lori
or it might
here?
be where
Yeah.
you have me exit,
That's what I
so
was
you guys
thinking.
can.
That's what I was
without
thinking,
me
because
exit.
we have not had
That's what I
any
was
time to
thinking.
talk as a group
Yeah, without me present.
for
And
30
then, and then
minutes.
next time, we'll talk with you.
Perfect.
I have enough background, I can fill
My new
everybody
puppy
in.
thanks you. I got a puppy for
Oh.
VQ is dog.
Of
Five,
course.
a little 5-pounder. He is, John.
So we're still
The bee's
recording.
knees.
We're still
You
recording
wanna-
because we haven't.
You wanna take
We
a
need to vote.
break?
We have to
Go.
vote. So wait, what's the consensus? Everybody feel like want to do that?
Yeah, I think.
I'm good with
I think 30
it'd be
minutes
good.
without Lori.
All right. So the motion is pursuant to 5 Illinois compiled statute 122C1 to go into closed session. Is there a second?
So I'll make the motion.
I just did.
Oh, you did? Then I'll second it.
Okay, great.
Do we need to do anything special to say that we are not going to come back into open?
Yeah, we're not going to make, well, it's a given. We're not going to make any decisions. That's pursuant to law.
Yes.
And we're not going to come back into any open session tonight. And we'll reconvene, not even reconvene, we'll have a open session next Monday night to be held at Emerson School.
Okay.
Okay? Any comments or discussions? And if not, we do have to take an open vote. So starting with Tom? Yes or no, or present?
Present.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Present.
All right, we'll go into close.